Hello and welcome to episode 133 of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook and for this episode I'm joined by drummer Peter Kogan. Peter's album Just Before Midnight is out now and the title track is what you're listening to now. This track features Peter's septet. This is a beautiful album and I hope you enjoy listening to our conversation about it and life and everything that Peter can share. Hi Peter.
Hi Hilary.
How are you?
Good, nice to meet you.
You too, very good.
Where are you recording from?
So I'm in Hertfordshire, about 30 miles north of London.
Wow, that's nice.
Whereabouts are you?
I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is right in the middle of the northern United States.
Yeah.
Right in the center.
Yeah. Oh, very good. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining me on Harmonious World. I'm really grateful.
I'm delighted to join you. Absolutely.
I love this album.
Thank you.
So it's called Just Before Midnight. There are so many things about it I like. So I'll tell you what they are first of all. I like the fact that it's got lots of different outfits. You've got lots and lots of different musicians involved, and I love that. But as part of the preparing for this, I looked at the press release and it says, while there are some stylistic nods to classic Blue Note and Impulse recordings of the 1960s, Kogan never falls back on the easy but tired formula of song/bunch of solos over the song's chord progression/song once more and out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true, that there's a very different approach. So where does that come from?
I guess being familiar with that standard format, when I was writing these tunes, I never just assumed that the players would play the exact chord progressions that are in the head or the melody of the tune. And so I would immediately think of what would be a good improvising template for the players that reflects the harmonic language of the tune, but is not necessarily an exact replication of the melody or head of the tune. So that was one of the more fun things to do, to kind of extract a very playable chord progression, from the tune itself, and that was sort of the idea, and so I've used that a lot in my composing over the last few years. I've started to do that more, partly because it's a lot of fun, and also because it makes for a better template for the players to improvise on. So that's sort of where that came from.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting, because there tends to be an assumption that, and I know some of my listeners aren't necessarily musicians, but there sort of tends to be an assumption that the improvised bits of jazz follow the same structure as, so it goes verse, chorus,
right,
and then the soloist does verse, chorus, and then it comes back in verse,
right,
and
yeah.
To do something different for the improvised bit is really interesting.
Thank you. I'm glad you like it. I've had a lot of fun with that, and I think the players are more comfortable with it too, particularly if the tune itself is a little bit complex. And I did that earlier with a few compositions, and then on this recording, I guess a good number of them have that. Pow, 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 yeah. Pow, 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 pow. Yeah, there's 4 pows. I always forget. It has a very similar kind of chordal language for the improv, but it's slightly different than the structure of the tune was rather complicated. So this simplifies the structure into like 4-bar, 8-bar phrases and allows the players to be really comfortable. In something like Isle of Kai, which has a very, very long structure, I think I was able to get it down to 24 bars to get the feeling of the tune for there's some short improvs in the middle of that tune. And I was able to really squeeze it down to make it very comfortable and fun for the players because there was a lot of reading in that chart. It's a very long chart. So this was, a relaxing spot in the middle of the tune.
Yeah, and I think also what it does is it means that the improvisation, yes, it has a relevance and a relativity to the tune, but it doesn't just kind of play around with the tune.
Right. Thanks for noticing. That you like that.
I do. Yeah. Yeah. And I like that as a listener, but also obviously I haven't played your pieces, but I can imagine that would be nice because it gives you more of a freedom, I think, more of a, a sense of being able to be inspired by the tune, but not replicate it.
Right. Right.
So tell me about how this album got recorded, how the different sessions, because obviously with different groups for different tracks.
Right. Okay.
You made it complicated.
All right. Well, during the COVID period and during the lockdown we had here in the United States, I did a lot of writing. It was like a great opportunity to finish compositions that I had started or ideas that I had. And then a few things came to me during that time. So by the time we were ready to start playing again, and I had been playing in my backyard outdoors over that summer, but I had two bands that I had been playing with over the last few years, a quintet with sax, trumpet, and rhythm section, and a septet, which added guitar and trombone to that. And these compositions seemed to lend themselves to both groups. So I had some engagements around town with the quintet and the septet. And after we had played through these tunes, the last one being composed in, I think, October, and that was I Dream of Danny playing the guitar. I realized it was a good time to start recording. So in January of this year, we got into the studio on 3 successive Mondays, and was able to record everything. First with the quintet group, and then secondly with the septet group, with a few patch-ons, I think, at the very end. And it was very efficient at this time. It was my experience of having recorded 3 other albums really helped. And I was able to do this fairly efficiently. And then we did some mixing at the studio over the next couple of months. There were the usual delays where we can't have access and so on. And there it was. By the end of April, we had a record ready. And I think it was released officially in June, but it was actually already there in May. I had copies already, and very, very happy with my wonderful colleagues. Just a lot of very talented, not famous people here in St. Paul, Minnesota, and Minneapolis. We're right next to Minneapolis, and was able to utilize these guys. Some of them quite young, so it was really kind of neat.
That's great.
Recorded.
Yeah, and I also like the fact that I'm afraid I'm a sax player, and I was brought up on drummer jokes.
Okay.
So to have a drummer who does the composition and the arranging, and is wonderful. I mean, I know you're not the first, but right. I always like it when you're not reverting back to the standards and things, because you've got that musicality and so where did you develop that composing and arranging skill?
I didn't go through the modern training thing with going to college and studying jazz. I was trained as a classical musician, and I had a wonderful teacher growing up who worked on keyboard harmony with me and identifying chords and so on. So moving over to jazz harmony was simply because I was attracted to it and I could understand it. But I spent most of my career as a classical timpanist, percussionist and timpanist. And I was with the Minnesota Orchestra for 29 years as a principal timpanist. But during the last few years there, I started playing jazz with friends and inviting people over. And I had had a period in my life in the early 1980s when I was freelancing as a drummer in New York City, and I had done some composing then. And around 2010 or something, I started going back to my compositions and I started writing again. And all of a sudden I had enough for a recording. And so I decided when I retired from the orchestra, I would just devote myself to jazz. And that's pretty much what I've been doing. I have some side gigs, you might say, as side hustles. I build Baroque timpani, things like that. And I do play a little bit of that still. I do some Baroque performances with my little Baroque timpani. But other than that, it's been the jazz thing. And been very satisfying and a lot of fun.
Very good. That's it. Eye-opening, the Baroque versus jazz thing, because on the surface they're completely different. Yet actually, because Baroque music was, it wasn't the same sort of recording and printing of music wasn't quite the same, and all of those sort of things. That I guess there was more improvising or being told what to do at a particular moment that worked then, but not necessarily another time. So I guess they're not that different, perhaps.
Well, I think that one of the similarities that I enjoy is the rhythmic aspect of Baroque music, and particularly when the writing for kettle drums, usually in those pieces, there's quite a groove going on. And so that's kind of a fun part of the alternation I do. I mean, I do, maybe 2 or 3 engagements a year with, there's a local Baroque orchestra. There's a couple of different groups here in town. And we do the Christmas Oratorio or the Messiah or a Mass, things like that. We did the B minor Mass. Those things are wonderful, but most of my energy is right now on my groups. And I have a wonderful opportunity now. A new brewery opened in town and they're having me in once a month. And so every month I'm going to be bringing in a slightly different group of people to play, which gives me a chance to expand on the players I use and try different things. So that's the most exciting thing happening this year, having a
That's very exciting.
Yes.
And I guess it's great for the musicians because they're playing perhaps with people they wouldn't otherwise play with, music that they wouldn't otherwise play, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's fantastic.
I have a group that we call it episode 4 of Bird and Diz Legacy Quintet. So what it is this will be our 4th engagement. And we're just exploring the compositions by Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, of which there's quite a few. And it makes for a nice 2-set engagement. I mean, we're trying different tunes out at each engagement. So that's the next up in October for me. And then in November, I have a engagement with a quartet with a wonderful local sax player named Brian Grivna, who's kind of the senior sax player in the Twin Cities community, and used to play with Buddy Rich. He was his lead alto, and we're doing tunes that he likes to play. So that's going to be a nice change of pace. And I have an engagement in January with a group that'll be basically trombone, guitar, and rhythm section. So again, a slightly different configuration. And it goes on.
Yeah, very good. It's interesting you're talking about lead alto from Buddy's band, because I've got a couple of friends who were in the Buddy Rich Band sort of towards the end.
Oh, towards the end, right.
Yeah, and you know, he was a really demanding man. I mean, the stories are legendary, but actually, you know, he got such amazing results that, you know, it's incredible.
Oh yes. Yeah. Like every drummer in the world just, you know, bows down to Buddy Rich. I mean, it's just such incredible finesse, technique, and his ideas, and you know, it's just such a level of drumming that's to replicate.
And you talk about, you know, Bird and Diz, and the legacy is, I think, because the history of jazz is sort of so small into, you know, it's not like we're not going back to Bach and Mozart and Beethoven and you know, all of that. It's such a richness of that legacy of the people that went before and how we can all build on that. It's an amazing thing. I think that my favorite track on this is Just Before Midnight, which is the title of the, you know, the title track. It sounds like it's a piano exercise, doesn't it?
I guess it started that way. I think the opening of it with just piano alone, pretty much, with a little guitar, was the initial idea of these chord progressions. Based on, to be technical, it's based on major thirds, and then going down a fifth, and then major thirds. But it's a augmented. So it's an augmented triad that is created. In other words, so instead of having it C E G, it's C E G sharp, and then we go down to D flat, and so you basically hit every note of the piano by the time you go through the sequence. And then I added some middle sections in between, and it just turned into a composition based on the initial idea. And then somehow it became this raging, you know, race.
Exactly.
Which was enormous fun for me. And the guys really did a great job. And actually, this is one where after the initial intro, we have the statement of the chord changes, which goes on for quite a while. And I think for the improvisation, I did stay with that on this one, so that it's the same sequence of chords. Okay. Again, it's slightly shortened for the improvisers, but it's still pretty long. And so I use that as the chord changes or the blowing changes. And then the ending, originally the tune was called Etude number 3. I had 3 etudes on this that I decided I'd give them titles ultimately. And I didn't have a title for this one. And as we were rehearsing it and playing it over a period of a couple of months, I kept adding cymbal dings at the very end of the tune, where it sort of slows down and rests. And ultimately, I ended up with 12, which felt just right. So then I realized it's like the chimes of midnight, you know? So that's how the title came.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Peter. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your interest. I appreciate that so much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to my conversation with Peter, and you can hear on this his percussion skills, which he talks about during that interview. This track is Ode to JC, Ode OWED, brackets Ode ODE to John Coltrane, which I think is lovely. And this is from Peter Kogan's album Just Before Midnight. And this features Quartet 1, which is Pete Whitman on tenor, a baby Stafford on piano, Charlie Lincoln on bass, and Peter Kogan on drums. I really hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode, and do give Just Before Midnight a listen. The links are in the show notes, and please remember to share everything that you're good at, and let's make this world a little more harmonious. And I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.